Promise me. Promise me.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Casually Hardcore Podcast. My name is Brian, and joining me in the position, right over here, is Chris.
That's me.
And for the first time on the podcast, Chemistral. You've heard him many times on stream. Chemistral has also been playing and making a lot of, I would say, very high quality content over on YouTube. You should check out his channel. Link will be in the description below. Chemistral is a Final Fantasy XIV player. He's a Guild Wars 2 player. He has been a part of this community for a very long time. I would regard him as a very insightful gamer. And so one of the things that we've been trying to have this scheduled pretty much even before E3. So there's just life gets in your way and things happen. So it is beyond my beyond excitement and joy that we finally were able to get Chemistral on to the podcast and also get a podcast out to you guys. So without further ado, Chemistral, what I want to do as our guest, as we typically start every show, is what are you playing? Introduce yourselves to both the Work To Game community and the online community as a whole. I give it to you, sir.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for having me on the podcast. As you said, I'm Chemistral, and right now I'm currently playing Guild Wars 2 in the break from Final Fantasy XIV, but definitely looking back and missing my red mage a little bit, but not enough to pull away from Guild Wars 2 just yet, just a little bit longer.
Anything else you're playing right now at the moment, or is it just 100% Guild Wars 2?
Pretty much for now, 100% Guild Wars 2. I do enjoy other things such as Overwatch or League of Legends, but for now, just Guild Wars 2.
Okay. Well, that's going to lead us into kind of like a first little bit of topic, but I'm going to toss it to Chris here. Chris, what are you playing right now, man?
Well, I'm about to prepare for my first Warhammer 40K tournament outside of game. That is not this weekend, but next. And so I've got a little more hobby time to spend on that. And then I've been playing a lot of WoW and a lot of 14. With occasional breaks for things like we did a little Fortnite yesterday and all that. But I have been, the vast majority of my time has been on stream lately. Outside of stream, I've had very little time to play. I had a little bit of time on Minecraft this weekend with some friends. They run a server, and I just kind of joined them to see what they were up to. But it's mostly been what you guys see.
So the conversation, the topic that we really kind of wanted the three of us panel on is MMOs in general, with the ultimate goal of getting to the idea of kind of a part one versus, in which that we look at the three. We're going to represent three big MMOs on this podcast. World of Warcraft, which has its expansion Battle for Azeroth dropping here in the middle of August. Chris is playing like the 8.0 content, and adjustments, right? So then, Final Fantasy XIV, which has an update on August 7th, but the big patch 4.4 is coming out in September. And then you have Guild Wars 2, which for me, I am not necessarily so familiar, but Chemistral has managed to allow me and help educate me on that game a little bit. And it's and there's a lot to kind of break down there. So I think, giving everybody here an idea what this podcast is going to cover here on the show today is talking about what do we want to see brought from these games to each other, whether it be, World of Warcraft to Final Fantasy to Guild Wars to World of Warcraft. What we want to do is get a general and have that general idea of like what we like about the game that we're going to be representing and what we would like to see that actually in the other games that we have a passion for in and of itself. So, but before we get to that meat of the conversation, there is a general theme that I think that is, I like to talk about a little bit about the current state of MMORPG specifically as it relates to it. Because I don't know, and this is where, Chemistral, I'd love to know your thoughts. Chris, I'd love to know your thoughts here, is that there felt like a time where it was like there was 300 MMOs coming out every day. You mentioned Fortnite, Chris. Chemistral, you mentioned Overwatch, and you mentioned League of Legends, right? So it felt like we went from MMOs being the thing to MOBAs being the thing to Battle Royale being the thing. And the first thing in my mind is like, aren't those all MMOs? Like I know that the general conversation we talk about it and we think about it as the either fantasy RPG. There's other games like BDO, out there, Black Desert Online for those who don't know. But like it feels like MMOs, like what we would generally say, it's pretty much like feels like a very stable here are the game options that you can play. I'd love to know your thoughts. Chemistral?
As far as all these games kind of being as MMOs, while they all have massive multiplayer online things, I think it will kind of like change because I remember, as you said, back when 300 MMOs were coming out, that was like back for me. That was back in like 2008, and it just seemed like free to play MMOs were out there just nonstop, left and right, trying to get your attention. Mm-hmm. Everyone's kind of fighting for a piece of the pie. And then when MOBA started to take the change of it, and it's MOBA's kind of delivered the MMO experience of, hey, you start, you level up, and you kind of you have the whole little MMO experience in like a little 30 to 40 minute match. And it's perfect. You kind of get your quick little fix in there. Mm-hmm. But then you take that over to battle royales. It's like, hey, let's actually run around, let's go do other stuff like that. And since you can actually get the gaming experience of it in a short amount of time, I think that's what kind of like, as we as consumers, we eat it up. Anything we can kind of finish faster, we go after usually. That's why we have things such as the meta or fastest ways to do it. But Chris, what are your thoughts on this?
I think that gaming is definitely a dialogue. It's definitely continued to change. You have to think back to like what 1.0 and what vanilla WoW were, for example. Like so incredibly grindy.
Yeah.
So what we look for and what we call an MMO, like we distill down like whatever the most important elements are. And then those actually seem to go a lot bigger than just their genre. So we take the very best parts of MMORPGs, right? And that's your cosmetics, that's the social atmosphere, that's the core thing that like I'm going to continue developing my account, and this, even if I come back over several years, I'm going to have all this intrinsic value.
Right.
Like, oh my gosh, I totally played in Christmas season of 2016. And you see that in like Candy Crush. You see that in like all these games, they bring in Farmville, like that, those core concepts of MMORPGs went long beyond that genre. You see them in Fortnite. And so I think MMOs as a whole have changed gaming, but the MMORPG scene is still there. Like there's still new MMOs coming out. There's still people trying it. It's just such a hard space to get into because what we expect now is such a large scale thing,
right?
That it's not something that like the three of us could get together and just make an MMO. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's so many thousands of hours of content that somebody expects to be able to play before they pay a subscription.
Right, and so that leads me to the general question or the concept about the health of the industry itself. I would say if we look at, and I don't want to disrespect Black Desert Online, I've played it, it's a solid game. But when you look at it, the investment, and I look at it from a business perspective, the risk to say, okay, you need to spend a absorbent amount of money because it needs to have all these features. If you don't launch with all these features, it's going to be DOA. It's like, have we reached this point within the MMO space when you look at, we're going to just, for the 3-panel argument here. If we need to bring on somebody for a fourth in a future like part 2 episode, let me know, and then we can go from there. But World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy, which the piece of Final Fantasy is that it launched and it failed. 14 did, and then they redid it. Square Enix had to go and spend an absorbent amount of money, and then they were able to and now it's the number 2. It's one of the 2 biggest subscription MMOs out there. Guild Wars 2, which for me. I played between the period of 1.0 and 2.0, but when I look at Guild Wars 2 now, like they've released 2 expansions. The game has been buy to play, but now you can get the base game for free, which was like utterly mind-blowing for me. But then that game has managed to have content and things like that. So outside of any, whether it's subscription buy to play or free to play model,
sure.
How can't, are we at a point where this is where it's going to be? Like originally what Chris, you said WoW was going to be a 10-year game. And then they were going to reboot. Are we ever going to see a WoW 2? Like, is there any reason that there should be?
No. 14, the same reason. They would never make 16 online. There's no reason to dissolve something that's working. So I think your core question there, and then I'll turn this over to Chemistral, was, is it possible for somebody to come in and not invest huge amounts of resources? Are these games becoming games of titans? Like, is it possible to start a bank these days, right? Wells Fargo, Chase, Bank of America, because of the level of features they can offer at that scale, have they chased each other, leapfrogged each other so long that now there's not room for somebody else to come in? You talk about the same with shipping, UPS, FedEx, DHL. Those 3 do, it's like 90% of the shipping and logistics worldwide. So basically all but specialized stuff like shipping wine and things like that. And so to be that big, we're talking about adding a 4th one right now. And that's because Amazon has their own built-in demand, and they're now starting to do Prime shipping, and it's a big deal because they're a disruptor, because they do have the backing to become the fourth shipper.
Okay.
And so I think it is possible to be a disruptor. I would point to Warframe and say on a low budget, but you have to be willing to do something unique, and you have to know that the reason that the big studios aren't taking risks is because risks sometimes fail, often fail. So if you're going to try to take the same formula, if you're going to like, oh, we're going to build the new WoW, well, then you better have the backing of Blizzard and Activision, or you're going to fall on your face.
So what does that look like, Chemistral? Like what kind of investment would that be? Like from your perspective, like when you look at, and you've been playing Guild Wars 2, and they don't charge you a monthly subscription fee. Is that something that is a key differentiator for you as a player? Is it the game and the aesthetics? What is it about Guild Wars 2 in your case? Because you jump between 14 and Guild Wars, and that's just kind of what it is. So I'm curious as to it, because if Chris is right, like if you have to have a Titan and a long, willing to make a minimum, $300-400 million investment into a franchise to be able to come in and try to disrupt the market, what is it that attracts you to Guild Wars 2 in this case?
I think for me, what attracted me to Guild Wars 2 is that it's much more open-ended. You're able to kind of build your character the way you can. Like, if you want to be a mage but has like the stats and the playstyle of a tank, you can do that. If you want to be a tank that's a support, you can do that. And so, like, once you kind of play the different at least for me, once I played like most of the classes I was interested in 14, I found the two that I really enjoy, Red Mage and White Mage.
Right.
And it's like, okay, I've experienced what there is, and there's really not quite nothing there to kind of keep me for now. I definitely like it. I'll come back later at some point. But let me go and try something else. And seeing, like, you're just walking into a sandbox and you can test anything you want. And right now, like, there are so many ideas I can't even try to comprehend. Like, all right, let me try this, then this. Like, it's going to be a while before I exhaust myself from ideas from that. Okay.
So as far as it goes then, I mean, it's that Guild Wars 2 offers you a lot of player freedom and choice. Now, Chris, you brought up, Fortnite, and one of the things that I think is interesting about the evolution of that game is that they looked at H1Z1, which was essentially like this kind of, there's a little bit of a battle royale mode, but there's also zombies and survival. And what they discovered when they were like, that people really enjoyed the player interaction whenever you would actually run into another player, and then they just kind of pared that down. So we look at, like Chemistral was talking about Sandbox for Guild Wars 2. Talk to me a little bit about what WoW has been doing. You've returned. You took a break. What is WoW doing that is really interesting to you, and why you make time to play that game? Outside of streaming it for the channel and being able to make versus videos for Work To Game, what is it about WoW that attracts you to that as a property?
So what attracts me is that it was my first MMO, and so it is absolutely, and I never ended on poor terms with WoW. It wasn't like my account got hacked or the game glitched and I lost a bunch of stuff. I really just had my friends move on to other games, and so eventually I moved on. So there was never a negative feeling to overcome to want to come back. It was always a game I enjoyed, and if there was ever a good reason to come back, I always knew I would. And so it was really easy to convince me. But what I think is distinctly different about when I played before and when I'm playing now is there's been a big tone shift. Before, the game was very completion oriented. And so you could open up your reputations tab, and that was the amount of things. And the problem with that is it's really linear, because it's either pass fail. And so you have to try to gauge how many, if we're going to go with just reputations, how many reputations is the appropriate number. And you're doing that with all levels of your content, your PvE, your PvP, your professions, everything. But all of them, you're saying, here's these 10 tasks. And if you finish these, you're done. And if you don't make the 10 tasks take hundreds of hours, then the people who are willing to put in hundreds of hours say they're bored. If you do make them take hundreds of hours, then the people who don't have hundreds of hours say they can never get to all of it, and therefore they'll never be the best, and therefore it's not worth playing. And so they were always trying to balance, but they were never going to get it right, because it's still a fixed number. And what they've done now instead is they've really engaged in systems where the initial threshold is very low, so it's geared towards that casual player. In all forms of content. So they have LFR, looking for raid, which makes PvE raids super accessible. They have PvP levels, which go super fast at first, so it gives you all your PvP abilities, super accessible, and so on and so forth. But then as soon as you hit the, let's call it cap in whatever form of content you're enjoying, there's this other level, and this other level verges on infinite. So there's, like even with your reputation games, every time you cap it after Exalted, you get a loot box. There's prestige levels in PvP.
I love that idea.
There's mythic dungeons in PvE. There's all these things where there's this scalable content where you clear it once very quickly, and then you clear it pretty quickly, and then it gets slower and slower as you approach the infinitely impossible for your top end players. And so I think they've really done a great job of building new systems that have this curve, and you just get to ride it until the curve doesn't feel fun to you anymore. And I really like that. I think that it allows you to find your spot and know that the guy playing next to you found his spot. And I think that's something that can keep people's attention for a very long time.
So what I'm hearing is obviously like, it seems like the evolution of the game, they've undergone a lot of, I guess, experimental changes, and it's like you kind of then discover these kind of things. And when it relates to the industry as a whole, we look at that iteration, that experimentation. You see what works, and you make adjustments to it. I would think, like, if I was representing Final Fantasy XIV in this with this question specifically, I would have to say that the narrative and the investment that they make into the world, it always feels so interesting, especially the first time you go into that world. Whenever you first step into a new zone, whenever there's a new expansion, it is just so both breathtaking and interesting, and there's this sense of adventure, and with the game as a whole, and with the narrative, and it's really cool to see them make that kind of investment. I don't know necessarily if that's all, like it's always the right one, because having gone to Guild Wars 2, I feel like I'm getting a really cool narrative in the story. But then at the same time, it's like, okay, it's just two characters side by side, and they're just talking to each other. There's no very cinematic approach. There's no, thing like that. And that's fine. But it's that I think if I was looking at 14, like critically, it's like, what does it do? And the fact is that with the like you said, Chris, we were talking about a Titan. It's like Square Enix with the Titan that is the Final Fantasy brand. For me, I think it's going to be a game that is persistent, that it feels like investing in. Now, before we get into let's pick and choose features and let's like move them here and move them here into the different in different areas. One of the things that's interesting though is that Square Enix recently had a player survey, and they do this from time to time. And one of the questions is that would players want a new Final Fantasy game that's an MMO? Now, whether that, I don't think that's going to be a 16. I would doubt that would be a 17. But at some point in the future, would players basically want a whole new MMO experience within the Final Fantasy world? And it's a fascinating question to ask. Now, we don't know the answers. We don't know if people are just saying yes or people are saying no. But at some point, though, Chris, I mean, this is an honest question that I just really wonder, is that in 2025 or 2035 or 2045, is there a value? Like, are we so done? Like, is the world within the World of Warcraft or within Guild Wars or whatever, that it's technology has advanced in such a degree, like it doesn't support VR, but to get it to VR, we literally have to build it from the ground up. Doesn't mean it has to be a different in-game world or classes or things like that, but is there a point in which that the investment in the technology that runs the system itself literally has to upgrade? And then if that point, wouldn't it make sense to just say, here's a brand new IP or property, here's World of Warcraft 2, here's Final Fantasy 20, here's Guild Wars 3. I mean, Guild Wars did it from a 1 to a 2, but then see, for them it was such a dramatic shift, right? Did you play Guild Wars 1?
I didn't, but after, it's like Guild Wars 2 is how I got to know the game. I mean, it's not the game, the franchise. But after seeing like what Guild Wars 1 was, I am interested in going back and playing that at some time. But It is radically different from the first.
So it is, so with Guild Wars 1, it is, and to 2, it's radically different. And so the question is that, does that shift, when it happens, have to be radically different? Destiny 2 wasn't radically different. In fact, it felt like they took things away. So using that as an example. World of Warcraft.
Destiny 2 is the example.
Yeah.
Yes is the answer. Destiny 2 is the answer.
So it has to be radically different.
Otherwise, it's not worth it.
Right.
Otherwise, it's not worth
Like,
it.
why?
There will
Why
come
would
a point for all these games. There will come a point for all these games. Like you said, it will be supporting VR. It will be something so drastic in the tone that rewriting everything won't make sense. So there will come a point that these games will change. That point doesn't look to be anytime soon for any of the three we're looking at here, in my opinion. There will come a point, but I think people romanticize it because people love the idea of going back. They love the idea. It's the same thing when you talk about like political discourse in the US. People talk about it was so much better in the 90s. Well, no, I mean, the 90s had its own job crisis. What was better in the 80s? Really, the 80s had some awful economy things going on. What was better in the 70s? Oh, the energy crisis. What was better in the 60s? Oh, when we had a lot of global conflict. What was better in the 50s? And like, it's better because you choose to block out the parts of what made a particular period in time negative. So World of Warcraft Vanilla was so much fun for me. It was my first MMO. It was something I could share with my brothers on our one working PC and our dial-up internet connection. We could afford a $15 a month subscription if we pooled our 3 allowances, and we did all of our chores. None of those things are true anymore. I expect a lot more out of a game than being worth my allowance. So do I want to go back and play vanilla? No. Did I enjoy elementary school? Absolutely. Do I want to do it again? No. Like it was this great time in my life, and that time is over. So I don't think we should go back and reboot these. I think that we should be looking for drastic progress if we're going to take the time to make a World of Warcraft 2 or a 16 online or Guild Wars 3. I don't know. What do you think, Chemistral?
I think it would be interesting to again have a more radical shift forward. Like it's good to remember, as you said, what we came from and know that, but building upon that and not just trying to recreate that same feeling, because you can never quite recreate your first love, so to speak. Like at some point, like, you go back and play your first game, and you are going to love parts of it, and then some parts are going to kind of stick out. Like, wow, how did I miss this? This was designed poorly. But as you said, I would love to see, say Final Fantasy 20 like being like another MMO, like a VR thing. Like that would be amazing, because from the first time I played, Final Fantasy 1 way back, all I could think of was I want me and my friends on an airship flying through the land and just like going off on an adventure.
Yeah,
that's all I want.
All right,
have you
so
played with the airships in 14?
What do you say? What do you say, Chris?
Have you played with the airships in 14, Chemistral?
No, actually. Are you able to like fly around them on them yet, or not?
In a cutscene. In a cutscene.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and the submarine thing. So, like, to bash on 14 for a second, is that, and then they release submarines, but there's really nothing, no content that is connected to it. So it's kind of like, you can now send them out on
cashing in on my dreams.
So
I'll play this.
So thank you guys so much. I think that it's always really interesting, and before then saying like let's pick and choose features, is like to see where we are, because I wouldn't be calling for a new Final Fantasy game right now, but honestly, when I look at it for like let's say Maddie, she's 4, but when she's 14, is she going to be playing Final Fantasy 14? And in my mind, I'm like, no, I hope that there's something new that maybe we can play and experience together, in which that it's, that's fresh, it's a new story, it's a new world, something that but that requires a huge amount of investment, and Square Enix got hit pretty hard with the last one. It's like, do we want to do that again? And if so, what does that look like? So it was a fascinating question from them. But what I want to do now is I want us to all put on our junior gamer, game developer hats and talk about what we like about, I guess we're going to each represent one of the 3 games. Chris, World of Warcraft, me, Final Fantasy, and then Chemistral, Guild Wars. I want us to start with, and we can spin this in different ways and then kind of like change different roles. But what do we want to see in our game from the other ones? So, Chris, what do you want to see in World of Warcraft from Final Fantasy, or what little you might know about Guild Wars, vice versa? But we'll start with Chemistral. So, Chemistral, okay. What do you want to see?
How many does he get?
What's up?
How many are we doing here?
3. A maximum of 3 if possible. If for some reason you have a really awesome 4th, I might allow it. It's like, no, you're done. Mute.
Disconnected.
And we lost him for some reason. So, Chemistral, let's start with you. What do you want to see in Guild Wars 2, pulling from, and really anything, but it would be really interesting to see with World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy 14?
Okay, there are some stuff from both, but I think one of the things that really kind of stuck me the most was WoW's Horde versus Alliance, like having two players on two factions. I love stuff like that. Like anytime there's like a war between the players, because whenever I meet someone on the streets who's like, "Oh, you play WoW? What are you?" That's the first question that's ever asked. Are you an enemy or are you a friend? And sadly, being an Alliance player myself, it's like, oh, I'm alone here in the sea of Horde players. But so I would love to have something like that. We do have World versus World, and I love it. But just something like that, and like kind of the world, so to speak, the general PvE world, and more PvP focused things. From 14, this is going to be a cheap and easy number 2, but the graphics. I mean, come on, we can all say Final Fantasy is the most beautiful game out of the 3, bar none, probably.
I'm not going to argue that point. I think you're 100% correct. I think it's gorgeous.
Oh, yeah. But one thing I do want to see more of for 14, I think if I had to recommend an MMO to someone, if someone I know is interested in the story of a game, I'm going to recommend 14 to them. It's amazing. I'm not saying Guild Wars 2 story is bad. I'm just saying 14, like they are it's a masterpiece. But sad, it's kind of odd since, those who know me from the streams, I'm not a fan of story stuff myself. But for other friends who are there you go. You have 14. So kind of having more of a narrative focus, like, hey, let's get some more of those dynamic cutscenes. Not like I do like the whole 2 characters side by side because the voice acting is phenomenal. But I would love to see your character actually, kind of moving throughout those or doing different things.
And then what's your number 3? Or unless that was it.
My number 3 will be revealed after we go to Chris because I'm still working on that one.
Okay, yeah. All right, Chris.
So I'm supposed to do one from each game.
It's your rules.
Okay.
It's 3. 3 things that you want.
From Guild Wars, the mount system I find fascinating. The way they interact with mounts, and I think that has a lot to do with. It's the same thing. This isn't one of my 3, but like when you look at level sync, which was really, I don't know if it was a 1.0, but it was definitely in 2.0 for Final Fantasy, and then WoW adds it in 7.35, which is fairly recent. The BFA is 8.0 for them. So like their system, in my opinion, has some polish to it that Final Fantasies didn't because they have the benefit of like they're in the future. So I think Guild Wars has a really neat mount system, and that's probably because they added it last of the 3. And I really would love to see them go back and kind of refine, at least maybe in like some temporary game modes or in some specific zones where mounts could have that kind of personality come out, the way minions do in 14 and in WoW. To engage with that.
Hey, Chemistral, just so for people who don't know about it, can you talk just a brief bit about how the mount system works in Guild Wars?
Sure. So in a nutshell, mounts are more than just, we're going to get from point A to point B faster. Mounts are actually new ways to traverse the area. You may have like this kind of mutant rabbit javelin thing that'll jump super high, allowing you to get on top of a cliff that's just towering above you. Like, how do I get up there? Or having this jackal made of magical energies that is able to transport like through sand portals and come out at a different completely like destination in time, or a skimmer that goes above the water so you have like you can finally swim, get across mass bodies of water without swimming and running out of energy and whatnot. The coolest one they added recently is the roller beetle, and the best way I can describe that is it's basically Initial D in an MMO. I'm gonna leave it at that. Just drifting left and right all over the place. You're boosting, going so fast. One of the streams, Brian, we were walking past and we had one of those things rolling right by us.
This one guy just blasted by us. I was like, okay, I need to hit cap. You
You
don't get mounts until 80, right? You don't get mounts until your level cap, right?
Yep, you're working.
It's like a whole process, right, to get them.
Yeah, so you earn you get the first mount, the Raptor, by doing like the first story in the Path of Fire expansion, and then as you go throughout and play, you'll unlock them more as you go. I'm actually going through it now because I really want to get that roller beetle like ASAP. That thing is amazing.
All right, so Chris, I jumped over to Chemistral to get a little more context, but what's your number 2?
So the I assume you're going to talk about like replayability and stuff when you talk about WoW, because their replayability systems across the board are very impressive. So what I would want from WoW to be present in all games, this is actually just true of all games, is the level of polish that they have and they bring to the table when it comes to things like their launcher, their subscription, like how you subscribe. It is so easy that you forget how much talent and how much design it takes to go into something where like, I just play the game. You just play it. You just get on. Like there's never, every time I unsubscribe from Final Fantasy, it turns into this huge ordeal trying to get subscribed and get it installed. And Brian has never had any of the issues I've had. And it's to the point where my wife is like, we will just find room in the budget, just never unsubscribe from this game again. Like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want it to ruin another day where I come home and like, I'm losing it because I can't get to play this game. And their launcher, I mean, you can buy your leveling potions in there, you can see cosmetics in there. There's no Mog Station, Lodestone, install the application. It just works. Everything. They save your macros. So if I go install WoW on another, I waited 5 years. I took 5 years off the game. I installed, it had all my macros, all my keybinds, everything exactly as I left it.
Yeah.
And that is just something that blows me away, that they have had it in the game for that long and that it is that good.
So what from another game do you want in any of that process or whatever? Because it's like that's what WoW is doing really well. So
when it comes to that process, I think they're doing it the best of these three. I'm not as familiar with the Guild Wars. I played Guild Wars 1. I haven't really spent a lot of time with Guild Wars 2. 14 just layers menus and currencies on top of anything they create. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. It's like, well, you got to nest it. It's go to the character menu, and then you're going to want to go to the HUD menu, and then you're going to want to scroll down to this menu, and then you're going to open up this dialog box, and it's like, just like when I move, I did it on stream the other day, and I think it made some of the Final Fantasy players go, wait, can you do that again? I wanted a character frame, my target character frame. I said, I think it'd be easier to see if it was on the right of my character. So I right-clicked, unlock frame, moved it, right-click, lock frame. Done. Like, that's it. I just changed my UI. Done. And that'll be saved on every platform I log in for the rest of time. And then from Final Fantasy, what I find that they do better than anybody else is just their level of detail with beauty. They do a great job of not assuming any corner is worth being cut. Sometimes in WoW, I feel like I go into an area and then I'm farming it for some reason. And it's like, this was clearly not designed with farming in mind. And a big piece of that where it really shows itself lately is for the 8.0 prep storyline. They do these prep storylines before an expansion where they come out like Final Fantasy's 1.28 thing, where it was meant for like, it's only meant for people that are playing right now. So these quests are going in the game right now. Another set just released last Tuesday. And on August 13th, all these will be removed from the game. They are literally limited time content, will never be in the game again. And they're in these old zones talking about why we're battling for all of Azeroth and why Horde can't trust Alliance anymore. And they're building in this story and this narrative for the next expansion. And you're in these old zones and you're on these like little flying bombing quests. And it just shows you like they really cheapened out when they rebuilt these zones for flying. And all the trees look so bad because in their head, they're like, but how often is somebody really going to be flying here? And they cut that corner. And now story takes them back there. And it's like, oh, we really shouldn't have taken that shortcut. This looks terrible.
It always gets you in the end. It always gets you in the end. I guarantee you on that.
So that's kind of the three things. That's the three systems I really admire. One from each of these games that I think the other games could really learn from.
So for 14, I would say when I look at World of Warcraft, having played that for a while, but mostly my experience was from 11, Final Fantasy 11 to WoW. And then obviously with what I've been playing and with Guild Wars, where both of these games ended up being kind of gap filler games in my mind, because from when 1.0 shut down and 2.0 came up, because I went and looked, I was like, when did I play? Because I bought it, Julie and I played it, we had fun, and then 14 2.0 launched, and I've been playing that game ever since. So then I look at it and I go, okay, well, these two gap fillers, but there are things that they're like, so Chemistral, you talked about the sandbox when we started talking about the podcast. And it's like, I look at it and I would say I would definitely like, whether it's the world versus world that they have, it pits servers against each other. It feels like as a server, as Sargatanas, it would be so cool if we were working together for some purpose, whether we were engaging in that content or not. Now, world versus world is PvP. I happen to like PvP, but there's also a PvE element to it as well, that by going into this, engaging in this content, they're pitting, something against itself. And I would think that would be something that would be worthwhile engaging a little bit more sandbox to the base game as a whole. Now this is I'm going to say this kind of could pull from either or, so that's my number one. We just need more reason to play together, and whether my passive and my casual play is contributing to a greater narrative, whether it's for my grand company or if it's for my server. So in a way that it's like when Chemistral, you talked about Horde versus Alliance. I like the trifecta, so I like that in 14 that we've got the three grand companies, because I think that adds, it's never, it's, one side or the other. Like you say you play Alliance, and then everybody you come across in his horde, it can feel isolating. But when you give 3 options, the likelihood that it's going to be all or one, is less. So I like that 14 does that, but I want to see more that, like, playing that, like, how is my Grand Company doing? How is the world in and of itself? What is this underlying, I would say meta, for lack of a better term, of what's happening by just me engaging and crafting and gathering and doing dailies and roulettes and, running around the open world? Why should I go have a reason to go kill an enemy or not? Etc. Just to have that piece, definitely from Guild Wars. Now, my number 2 is it's pulling from both World of Warcraft and Guild Wars, and I would say it's the concept of the player economy. In World of Warcraft, you can sub to the game for gold, and just having that as an option. In Guild Wars 2, there is no subscription fee, but you can make gold, turn it into their premium currency to buy the things that help fund and support the game, whether it's cosmetics or features like bags or I haven't even discovered all that can be purchased with gems, because it is such a vast store. It offers a lot of options there, and it's how they use to fund it. And then I look at 14, and I don't want, and I'm not saying that it shouldn't be a subscription based, but I love that 14 actually has a premium currency. It's the Krista that's a part of the MOG station. So tying into what like Chris was saying about how the launcher and all this it's all segmented. There's no in-game store. And so that when I look at that, the in-game economy, but we already have a premium currency. So it feels like those systems are just like they're like, hey, let's do this. And then somebody was like, oh, how's that coming along? And the guy's like, oh my God, I totally forgot to finish that. Like, we do have the Krista, like that you can use Krista, especially when it comes to Square Enix.
I totally forgot about Krista.
What's up?
I totally forgot about Krista.
Everybody does. You can pay for your subscription. You can pay for your subscription in Krista
and all the other stuff.
Right. You can pay for your subscription in Krista. Why can't we take the one extra step? Now, I get that there's definitely going to be economy things that we have to figure out, and I think that's one of the... And so that my number 2 is that we need a better player economy, and it needs to start looking at these features, because even Yoshi P said when World of Warcraft introduced the concept that he would look into it, and it's successful, it works. I think, like Chris has said this a couple times, it's fair. People were worried it was going to wreck the economy, but what it does is it just basically takes the money out of gold sellers' hands. It's like, it gives you
a reason to make money.
Right.
Yeah.
It gives you like if I suddenly pile up 1,000,000 gil, I'm like, or 1,000,000 gold, it's like, what am I going to use that on? Oh, well, I could always pay my sub for 5 months.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And then as people sell that stuff, that affects the economy. So it's like it's not a static value. And then as a player, if I come into this game and I'm like, oh, there's no way I can get ahead. I have to go grind to be able to make this money. Or I could go pay from a guild seller, risk my account. They're stealing people's accounts. That business is shady by its nature. Or I could just give that money to Square Enix and be like, hey, what would be great is if I could give you $15 and I could get this stuff so that I don't have to go and grind 6 months.
Yep. Instead of buying the collector's edition, I'll spend the extra $30 at launch of the expansion, and I'll start the expansion with an extra 10,000,000 gil.
But so it's just like the simple fact we have Krista that I would say what Square Enix could be in a unique position to do, like with World of Warcraft, is that they have a ton of games. Square Enix has a store. Like, imagine being able to take that Krista and be like, well, I don't want to turn it into a sub, but I would like that plush. Or I'd like, it's just that all of a sudden you have an economy and you have a value to this. I don't know, obviously, how that would end up working in the grand scheme of things from the Japanese hosted company they are. Sometimes, I know that with buying stuff from their store can end up being difficult tax wise and shipping wise and all that stuff. So that would be my number 2 that I would love to see from those games. And then I guess lastly, when I look at it, is both I think with PvP. And this is just me because I like PvP. When I look at World of Warcraft, when I look at what Guild Wars 2 does, and they do so well, I like how it feels like those games, and maybe it's the player base, but it feels like they remove a lot of roadblocks to being able to get into this content. And they've had years to do it. And so I can't say that I want Guild Wars 2's PvP system. I did talk about World versus World, but with what I've seen with Chris, they've got Capture the Flag. They have all these different game types. The way it balances. So one of the things he was telling me is that from a speed perspective, it's like, okay, maybe you'll have 2 healers on your team. Maybe you won't have any healers, but each team is going to have the same amount of healers, you know? And it's like, so it helps simplify the math. So it's like, instead of like, oh, we'll be able to get 4 healers, but it's going to take 20 minutes from the match, or it's going to take us 5 minutes to be able to form the match, and each team has 1 healer. Okay, great. Or, oh, there's a lot of healers in queue. Cool, give them 2. There's no healers in queue. Well, a lot of people are just going to die, but it's not that one team is wrecking the other, because both teams don't have a healer spec in that regards. And that ends up being a huge change to it. And then I think about the feast, and I think about how that's all set up, and it's like, it would be really cool to see more of these kind of game types. And I think streamlining how people put into queue and when they do it. And that's actually something I would steal, as I said, as the host here, an optional 4th from Destiny. Destiny, you know, as much as like that game, and Bungie has really mismanaged it. When you look at like the weekly, like you get these weekly things, and it's like it pushes people into content. Here's the weekly playlist, and there's bonuses, and there's modifiers, and this is the thing, you know. And so it ends up being that you get this concept that it's like, yeah, okay, well, this week it's Frontlines. Oh my gosh, everybody's in Frontlines. I haven't played Frontlines in a month. And they end up seasonalizing over without having to be like in the winter or in the summer. It's like over the course of a month. Okay, we know we're gonna do a Frontlines thing once a week, and then there's bonuses, and they do all kinds of things, and you're just into queue. Everybody's into queue because that's what's happening. So then it's Feast. Then it's their MOBA version, whatever it's called, Rival Wings, and then it's like, and then you end up having that to where over the course of any kind of cadence, and that's something I really appreciate what Destiny does so well that I would steal, and nobody here is representing Destiny because it sucks, but going from there in and of itself. So those are my 3 guys. You guys got any comments? Chemistral, like what are your thoughts on what I shared?
Actually, I kind of want to further echo you on that, because like, the one thing that I do miss a lot is I love PvP, even though I'm hardly ever good at it. Hardly.
You don't have to be good at PvP to love it.
Oh, yeah. But I love it. Like I said, I'm not that good at it. Anyway, just lost my train of thought for a second. Oh, right. So the one issue I have with 14's PvP system is that it takes, at least for me, forever to get a PvP match. Mm-hmm. I think the last time I actually was able to get into a match was like when Rival Wings came out, and everyone's playing that, and we played for a couple of weeks. And after that, try to go back and do a PvP match of any type, and it's like queue time, 30 minutes.
Right.
Well, you don't really feel like sitting in that queue for it, so it's just let me just.
And you can't queue for anything else.
Yeah.
So like you can't.
Yeah, it does oddly lock you out, because it's like you like, oh, can I put myself into Frontlines, Feast, and the Rival Wings? And if they're all 30 minutes, I don't care. I just want to play, pop whatever first. Yeah. But yeah, it does say nope.
And that's
like, you can't even like it's not like you can go. There's no way to be like, hey, we as a group want to go do Frontlines, and so we'll clear a leveling dungeon, and because we're in a pre-made, we don't want to do it through Duty Finder. And if the Frontlines pops up, just pull us out of the leveling dungeon. We don't need to be able to pick back up where we left off. We don't need to finish it. Like we're just killing time. Mm-hmm. But instead it's like, no, you're off in the Duty Finder server, so sorry. So like it's like I'm just supposed to just stand around for a half hour
and craft.
Yeah. At least the crafting's good. Best crafting system ever.
All right. So let's pivot this then, because that kind of gets into the second piece of that is that what do we not like about our game? Because it's like, so I here's what I said that I wanted from them. Let's just round robin. I like that in chat talking about battle royale. I would say just as an aside, Guild Wars 2 World versus World is as close to a battle royale that would work in an MMO. I think ESO has something very similar where you can kind of queue in. It's this persistent area, and it's objective
WoW
based.
has a mode where you fly in.
Right. Okay. So WoW has that too, but it's that you have this persistent, and it's a weekly event. Like, so when you think of the battle royale, it's about that 100. And it's quick matches. You get in and out. How does that translate into a persistent world game in which that you're progressing? And I think that's the fact that they make the match last a week. You get respawns, and it's all about completing these objectives as a server in and of itself. I mean, I guess you could do the 100, but then you have your classes, you have all this other stuff that it's like, well, just Square Enix, just go make a battle royale game that you can launch, you can queue from it or whatever. But let's go ahead and continue the kind of the thought and try to stick with the rule of three, Brian, and talk about. So I said this is what I want from y'all's games. Now what I want to do is I want you guys to insert your stuff that you like about. So what I would like about 14, I want to insert it into either Guild Wars or what into World of Warcraft. So instead of you guys taking from the other games here on the that's represented, do you get the concept? Hopefully, I'm gonna make sure.
Why don't you go first?
Okay, great. It's like Chris kind of had a slight thing. He's like, "What is he asking?" So for 14, I want to insert controller support in both of your games. For crying out loud! Like I really want World of Warcraft and Guild Wars 2 to use and take Final Fantasy XIV's control scheme. Can't even say it. That's how much I want it. So it's I think of it. It's like, oh, controllers wouldn't work in MMOs. Bull snot. They work fine. They're great. They're a great option for players who like it. And I think especially Guild Wars 2 could easily translate because you only have 10 skills. World of Warcraft, you got more skills. But then with the double cross hotbar, 14's found a way to really extend it. People are like, oh, you're limited on skill slots. Like, I have hundreds of them. It's about how do I get to them efficiently and how do I memorize where the heck I put that stun. So I would say immediately, more control scheme, options for players, especially, the big three. BDO supports controllers not that well, so I'd still say that people need to translate that. Chris, you got a thought?
No, I was asking, are you just doing one or are you doing...
Oh, the other, I'll do two. And the other one is freaking come to consoles. So what 14 does really well is it's cross console. So they need to bring, they need to bring World of Warcraft to consoles, Guild Wars 2 to consoles, and we need to have that. And I think just from a cross-play perspective, I think when we tying this all the way back to the beginning of the show, when we look at the whole health of the industry of MMOs, that the fact is these can no longer live on these PC platforms alone. And you see the strength of something like Fortnite, in which that you have over 120 million players, and it's mobile, and yes, those platforms all can kind of support that. But now we look at consoles like PlayStation 4, Xbox One, even the Switch to some degree, can easily be thrown in there. I look at Guild Wars, I'm like, this is a game from 2012. I could easily see this translate over to the Switch if they had proper controller support. So those are my two, and I'm going to turn it over to Chemistral. So start inserting things that you like about your game into these other games.
One thing I do want to insert, especially in 14, and I haven't played WoW in a while, so Chris, you let me know if this kind of works or not, is they have two different types of modes. So you have your world versus world PvP, and you have your small structured arena style PvP. And what's cool about that is in the small structured arena style, you actually have, some skills are balanced and tweaked, kind of like how 14 is. You don't have access to all your skills. You just kind of set them out. So that's what the structured one is. Everyone's on the equal ground. But with world versus world, your PvE gear actually plays a difference. You can use any build that you can use in PvE, you can use in this PvP mode. I would love to go to PvP having all my skills as a red mage. For WoW, I like how WoW does their specs, and I want to see more options added to those specs. I kind of miss WoW skill trees, to be honest, back before they reverted them. So I'll say that. I mean, the new system is nice, but I do kind of appreciate the old one a bit better.
Okay. So our PvP representing WoW actually has every spectrum on the gamut. So at the largest scale, we have what's called War Mode. And actually, anytime you're in a capital city, you can opt into War Mode, and you basically get plus 15% experience, added loot to quests, and things like that. And it's world PvP. You're in your gear, you're at your level, you have all your skills. The classes are not balanced in any way, so some of the classes are excessive at killing other players in the world, even though they may not be as good in structured PvP. And then when you go into structured PvP, you have everything from solo content, last man standing content. You also have all the way up to 3v3s, 2v2s, 3v3s, 5v5s, 10v10s, 15v15s, 20v20s, 40v40s, all kinds of different game modes across there. Capture the flag, secure the points, gather the resources, deathmatch. There is every type of mode. There's even like you hold this ball and it makes you more powerful, but you take more damage. And there's 4 of these balls out there. There are so many types, and they've all been balanced to varying degrees. And so people like them to varying degrees. Some of the maps are very balanced. Some of the maps are really, you could flip a coin on which team's going to win. Or people feel they're skewed heavily towards Alliance or Horde on the start. So it is all over the map on PvP to kind of answer your question there. So if you can dream it, you can do it in WoW PvP. So what I would take from WoW and shove into other games, I would shove the add-on support, having an entire community of junior developers working for free. People like us, they just put their hat on, they build an add-on, and it works to varying degrees.
I'm an engineer.
They just shove it into the game. And then if it's good, then WoW takes it, they refine it, and they make it run native. And it gets built into the game, and now it runs smoother, and it's easier to use, and all of that. But add-on support is an incredible piece of this community and does a great job, and has actually become almost a dialogue with the actual developers, where they actually have done a great job of actively supporting the community. Part of their patch release schedule is that they make sure that patches are out far enough in advance ahead of a wave of players, knowing that the add-on community has to catch up and that many of them are unpaid. So, I mean, they are very considerate when it comes to add-on developers. And what that also means is, like a considerate parent, when they've set out a broad set of things you're allowed to do, when they make a rule, they expect you to follow it. And so when an add-on developer oversteps and they say, hey, you guys can do anything you want with add-ons except these 4 things. And if you do any of those 4 things, they will shut it down hard. But otherwise, they don't care. They're pretty loose. And then the other thing I'd love to see them shove into other games, especially Final Fantasy, is the mythic type system. The idea that you're going to take existing content, even if it's not all existing content, because sometimes content, we've learned so much since that content came out that it's best to just act like it never happened, because dungeons are better now than they were 10 years ago. But taking at least like a spectrum of content and finding a way to do it for replayability. So the mythic system is the obvious shoe-in, where they take current dungeons and they add modifiers to them. A lot like a heaven on high type thing, and then you can set how difficult you want it to be. And the higher the difficulty, the higher you're going to get in your weekly reward chest. But there's also things like time walking, where they basically say, go back and run dungeons from a previous expansion, and we'll give you loot we'll give you tokens towards, unique mounts and things like that to kind of fill the time. So they just do a great job of saying, we're going to take an aspect of our game and we're going to look backward, which makes it a lot easier than developing new content. It takes them months to build a dungeon. It takes us 5 hours to beat it for the first time.
Mm-hmm. And then it's by the time you beat it on the 10th time and the 50th time, it's like when we talked about with, when we had a Thamrol on, we're talking about like, okay, how do we feel about it? Like, we love it. And then by the 50th time on that dungeon, it doesn't change. There's nothing that has changed. It hasn't gotten harder. It's only gotten easier. It's about then trying to get as fast through it as possible. And then it's just, you get it on repeat and you burn out. And then it's like, and then especially when they only introduce like one. And so the challenge is, to speak to this engineerically, is that they have to spend 6 months a minimum building out that dungeon. And the resources and the cost and the investment and that, and then we get it and this is great. And then, and we keep running these walls. They have to create a way, and they have to build a way so that they can take the things that they build and then they can scale and they can change and they can evolve in a way that keeps it fresh. Right? And that's where Heaven on High, just to sit here and bash on 14, that's where you take Heaven on High. And no, it's like, as much as I love it, I think Stormblood has personally been kind of a letdown, because I look at the game, where the game's developed and where, in my mind, I think they should be. And the question is that behind the scenes, are they making these kind of investments? Because these things aren't light switches. As much as people are like, oh, this should be easy, as much as even I find myself saying this should be easy. It's like, no, it's not a light switch. It's going to take at a minimum 6 months, if you're lucky, 12 or 18 for more of that. So you go in, what you do is that you got to,
without a beta test,
right? And so what I see 14 doing, what I assume that they're doing, I look at Eureka, I look at all this, is these are beta tests, right? They're like, let's put this in, let's see how it works, let's refine it, let's change it up, let's rock and roll, and then okay, now we're going to pull this in the game. I look at Heaven on High, and the thing, as I said, 14 has a Mythic Plus system. It's just not put together. You have all the dungeons. You have Heaven on High, which has modifiers. It has kind of some kind of random factor to it. What you need to do is that you just need to bring that into a piece of content, and then the dungeon design, like Chris said, it doesn't have to be every dungeon, but imagine if it was. And I like weekly and monthly kind of rotations here. But imagine if it's a weekly thing. Here's 5 dungeons that are in the Mythic Plus for this week, and then you can go and level them up, and then essentially like maybe one dungeon leaves, a new dungeon comes in, and we're it's just do. But it's enough that it's like, what are the dungeons this week? What's the leaderboard? What's this piece? And I think in and of itself, because we literally have like 65 plus dungeons in 14. And let's say 45 of them. I mean, they're really well done. Monsters need to scale. Things need to scale. Just add in these modifiers that change how you play, and then you got to also then give the incentive for why you want to go in there outside of just placing on a leaderboard. It's like, okay, now here's a way that you can participate in this wide variety of content that is now slightly modified, and it's changing. So the next time you do it, you'll have a different experience because you'll have different modifiers.
And how does world scaling work in Guild Wars? So
As far
level
as-
scaling in Final Fantasy is going to sync you back to that level, and your skills are going to be bound to that level. So if you go back to level 10, you only have the level 10 skills available. In World of Warcraft, if I'm level 50 and Chemistral's level 30 and Brian's level 10, and we all go to run a level 10 dungeon, we all go in with our existing set of skills. I actually go in, and to me, everything looks like it's my level. And my DPS and all of that, it looks like it's my level. It's just artificially increasing you guys up to that. So I'm just hitting it as if I was hitting a mob of my level. And so I'm gaining experience and things like that appropriately. And so like, how does that work in Guild Wars?
It kind of takes like some of the features from both of those and kind of hybrids them together. So it'll, like, say when I'm leveling with Brian, it'll down level me down to his level with all my attributes and whatnot. But I still keep all my skills. I still keep all my passive traits, all my like bonuses on my armor and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But if Brian was to come up to like where I was at, he would still be his current level. It doesn't upscale. The only time it'll actually upscale a player is if they're in World versus World and still leveling.
Okay.
Right. So, and then it ends up being by the zone. So this zone might be a level 40 zone. So it's like, as long as you're that level and below, you're there. If you're higher, then it's going to make you level 40.
Yeah, that's how the world works in WoW. They'll take a whole continent and say this continent is level 60. Mm-hmm. And so from 1 to 60, it scales with you. But as soon as you go beyond 60, it stops and you just become God mode.
I don't think Guild Wars 2, I mean, I could be wrong because like you still have your stats and your passives and stuff like that. So you do have a benefit, but I don't feel, that's one of my complaints about that especially back in the day, maybe they changed it, is that I never really felt like, oh my gosh, I could outpower anything. I could like, I'm really struggling with this quest. If I grind enough here, I can just go and just roll over it. I never felt like that in Guild Wars, but in 14, I feel like that outside of the dungeon. I mean, even the dungeons, I feel a little powered when you're at that cap and you've got the gear. It's like cool.
Especially when you talk about 5.0 and 6.0, the ARR like raids and stuff are going to become a joke.
Well, yeah, and we just get fast and et cetera. So the one thing that I think though that I do miss in it is that one of the things that's real convenient, especially when you look at that, is that when I played with Mike and Chemistral on stream, like we were just in a group together. Like there's nothing you got to worry about. There's no extra thought. There's no dropping party because I'm hurting your experience, and there's none of this. Because in 14, you either need a party sync or they just need to say you're in a group and then it's, here we go. You're in the zone and boom. Something needs to happen in that regards, absolutely, when it comes down to the core root of the game. Because one of the things that it does it for the fates and then it does it for dungeons. But if anybody I was going to play with anybody on stream and they're level 5, I have to stand outside of their party. And then I have to join their party to get into the fate. So I'm hoping that what we're seeing over the course of Stormblood is that behind the scenes, Square Enix is really investing into 5.0 and the systems that go behind it and making it easy. Because if I was going to steal a fifth thing from either of the games, it's like talking about how the world is kind of separated and it doesn't matter what server you're on. You can always group it together in the open world. And Guild Wars does that really well. It's still server based, but they have multiple, shards within that zone so that for some reason, and I was even playing and it was like, hey, there's not a lot of people on this shard. Do you want to move to a higher pop area because they want that engagement. They want that livelihood as a part of an MMO, living and breathing in and of itself. So, there's...
WoW's is pretty graceful, but it took them until 7.35 to come out with it.
And
But they brought it in, though, so better late than never.
Well, and that's the whole point. What my hope is that, these games are learning from one another. I feel like when you go look at the success of each of them, that they have these underlying things that add a lot of value. We obviously really enjoy these games a lot, and enough to sit back and take time to have to go and reset up a computer and do all that mess to sit here and have an hour-long podcast to talk about these things. And as it relates to it, there's a lot I think that we can pick apart. And so at this time, like especially if you're watching this video later on YouTube, would love to know your thoughts in the comments below. When what are the systems and things like that it speaks to. There's we talked about sandbox, we talked about nostalgia, we talked about the systems, we talked about replayability. All of these things I think make modern games great, but also that I think MMOs can have a long life ahead of them. Even though I don't necessarily see anybody really, a big company, making that risk in the investment right now. It's, when they look at that, it's just, like if you say, hey, you need to launch a new Final Fantasy game and it needs to have everything that Final Fantasy 14 has right now, up to 5.0 at a minimum. And then you're like...
perfectly balanced, ready to go.
Ready to go.
Day one.
It's hard because it's like, and then like how are you going to monetize it, and how is it going to be fair to the players, and how it's going to it takes passion to do that, and that's what I see in ArenaNet with Guild Wars. That's what I see with Blizzard, and that's actually a lot with Square. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. That is our hour for Casually Hardcore episode 6. Before we wrap up the show, as we like to do, I wanted to make sure, Chemistral, do you have any final thoughts regarding MMOs or anything in general? Honestly, I say, sir, the floor is yours. Feel free to say whatever the heck you want.
I will say earlier back when I chimed in about the question is where MMOs have been in the past and like they were abundant in 2008. And as MMOs are my favorite genre of all time, it does kind of felt stale. Like nowadays, it's just, WoW, Final Fantasy 14, ESO, Guild Wars 2. Like that's kind of, there's not much fresh blood in the scene, so to speak. Mm-hmm. We actually are seeing a resurgence in MMOs, mostly through kind of Kickstarters. One that I'm looking forward to is called Ashes of Creation. You can go and check that out. They have like a whole bunch of different, entire development team for that worked on different games past, such as EverQuest and whatnot. So they have experience behind them, and they have the funding, and it still shows like they got well over the budget that they want for it. So just because fans are saying, hey, we still love this genre as a whole. We still love the MMO. We want to see this grow more. So I will say don't lose heart in MMOs and just keep looking forward to the future and, show your love for the game that you love.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris?
No, I think it was all there. I would take this chance to say thank you to Chemistral. If you guys haven't seen any of his content, definitely go check that out. And that's really it.
And I would say we should get Phantasy Star Online 2 sometime in North America. Make it happen.
If only.
Sega.
If only.
At PSU Live, how's it going? I'll say we totally need to get Chili on the podcast. And I pivot off of that because we are scheduling Larry Czar to come on to the podcast here soon. We're going to do another episode with Ethis. We're going to do Thamriel as well. So if you guys...
and Rob.
What's up? And Rob's coming up this Sunday. Like this last month has just been insane for scheduling. We've moved podcasts around like crazy. So what we're going to be doing is, thanks to all our Patrons, obviously who are there. You guys, if you want to, help and have these more often, maybe consider becoming one. It's not a money thing. It's more a volume thing. So we're trying to get to 40 Patrons. I think we're at 26 or something, 23 or 26, which is great.
23, I think.
And so it's that, we're making good progress. If we're able to hit that target, what we want to do is put this in an audio form. And it's mostly because just the sheer amount of work, we do have a lot of people who help us and fund us through Patreon, and they carry a lot of the weight. And I like to see if we can just kind of help offset that. And yes, Larry Czar is going to come on the show. We'll let you know when we have a date for that. He was moving, and then, like I said, it's been... the love I have of doing the podcast is literally like the thousands of hours of scheduling and emails and things like that to set it up. But at the same time, also, if there's other creators out there that you guys know and would like to have on the on the podcast, because we don't just talk about Final Fantasy, we talk about any topic related to video games. let us know. We're always going to reach out to them. That's all we can do. And keep asking people to come on board. And that's just what this is about. For Work To Game, my name's Brian. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chemistral. Thank you, everybody. We're going to go ahead and wrap up this piece. We're going to take a quiet pause, and then we're going to come back for a little Q&A for a couple minutes with everybody here in live chat as well. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day, and take care.